brachos, the Gemara asks, what is the basis for bracha rishona? The bracha achrona, the after bracha, after you eat, you say it, is a Torah law. What about the pre-bracha? So the Gemara says, it's a kal v'chomer. Ma'adoch shu sovea mevorech. If a person acknowledges Hashem when he said it, kshu roiv lo koshken, so when you're hungry, there's no question you have to acknowledge Hashem. Then the Gemara concludes, Osa lihonos kol anene kol ocha v'shoseh kol aneno molam zeh b'lo brocha is mal. That if you benefit from this world through eating or drinking, it's like you benefit something that was consecrated. That's what the Gemara concludes. First, the Gemara starts with the kal v'chomer. Ma'adoch shu sovea hu mevorech kishu roiv lo kol shkem. If when you say it, the Torah requires you to bench, to acknowledge Hashem, definitely kishu roiv, when you're hungry, when you're in need. Then the Gemara comes, kol ochel v'shoseh b'lo brocha is moal. If you eat or drink without brocha, it's moal. So Tosas points out over there that it's clear the basis is not a kal v'chomer. Because if it would be a kal v'chomer, the pre-bracha would be a Torah obligation. Because kal v'chomer is one of the 13 methodologies in which we interpret the Torah. And yet we know Safi brachos lahokel. If one is in doubt whether he said birchas hamazon after you ate to a sated point, you have to repeat the benching. But yet bracha rishona, the pre-bracha, if one is in doubt, one does not repeat the bracha because it's only rabbinical. But if it's a kal v'chomer, it's a Torah obligation. Evidently, it's clear the Gemara fell off that reason. The question is, what is the? Evidently, it must be some kind of fallacy in the logic of the kal v'chomer. Because if there is no fallacy, it should be a Torah law. So we always mention, Rameir Simcha Vince explains, and he points out what the fallacy is. The fallacy is this. When does a person normally bolt from Hashem? When a person feels a sense of security and he feels complacent, that's a moment where a person is vulnerable to deny Hashem. As we're going to see in a moment, in Sheni, what does it say in Sheni? Right after this, one has to be careful not to forget Hashem. And if you forget what happens, what is the consequence of that? The vilti shmor mitzvosav mishpotov u'chukosav. You cease observing his mitzvahs, his laws, and his statutes. Shenoch mitzav chayo. Therefore, you have to be very careful. Why? Because, as it says, pen tochal v'savoto. You'll eat and you'll be sated. Ubotim tovim tivne v'yoshavto. And you build very special domiciles, houses. Uvekorchav tzoncha yirbiyun. And your herds and your flocks will increase. V'kesev v'zov yibraloch. And silver and gold will also increase. Whatever you have is going to boom. V'rom levovcha. And what happens when that happens? When a person becomes financially successful, secure, your heart becomes uplifted. V'shachachtes Hashem Elokecha hamotziach meretz Mitzrayim b'savodim. You will forget your God who took you out of Egypt, not only from Egypt, from where? From your lowly state of being a chattel. You're going to forget him, and therefore, but what is the cause and the reason why you forget him? Because of all your success, your power, your financial worth. That will be the cause, but it's v'ram levavcha. You'll become arrogant. You'll become self-centered. You believe it's you. It's not him. That's when you forget Hashem. So when a person has that sense of satisfaction, complacency, that he's no longer in need, that's the moment that he's vulnerable to this kind of situation. So Rameir Simcha Vince explains, the moment you sated and you finished eating, you immediately have to trace the basis for that satiation. And how do you trace it? To its source? That's why the after bracha is a Torah obligation. The pre-bracha, when you're not in that state of mind, because just to the contrary, because you're hungry, you have a greater level of clarity. So if that's the case, there's no need for a pre-bracha. However, rabbinically, based on a pasuk in Tehillim, because it says Lashem Oretzum Loa, the world its entirety belongs to Hashem. Unless you acknowledge that it's His world, it's moal. It's like benefiting something that's consecrated. And then David says, Amel says in Tehillim, Hashemayim Hashem Oretz L'Sad Levnei Odom. Once you've made that acknowledgement, Oretz L'Sad Levnei Odom, you have the release that Hashem releases it to us. So it's real, the juxtaposition between Birchas HaMazon and what the Torah says. You have to be careful not to forget Hashem, not to do His mitzvahs, not to do His chukim, mishpatim, and all the other things which are stated. It's due to one's level of success, that I feel I'm self-sufficient, I'm independent, I need no one, including God. Therefore, when it comes to Birchas HaMazon, it's a momentary sense of complacency, satisfaction. That moment you're vulnerable, therefore immediately you have to identify what is the source of that complacency and satisfaction, and that's why the post bracha, which is Birchas HaMazon, is a doraisa. So that is the fallacy in the logic of the Kal V'chomer. Therefore, Savi brachas are lakula, because the pre-bracha is only rabbinical for that reason. Last week's parsha, the Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, "V'atem adveikem Hashem Elokechem chaim kulchem hayom." And when you cleave to Hashem Elokechem, you chaim kulchem hayom. So the Baal HaTurim writes over there, there's a tag on the kuf of dveikim. Dveikim means to cleave. So he says, the kuf on dveikim alludes to mei brachos. How is one dovek to Hashem? By saying mei brachos b'chol yom. When you say 100 brachos every day, creating that mindset, and that God is in the forefront of your mind, that is the cause of atem dveikim. Because what do we say? What is the basis? It's v'shachachtos Hashem Elokecha. The basis for all the problems is because you forget about God. But if you say mei brachos b'chol yom, which are only rabbinical, that itself creates this cognizance of Hashem's presence in your life. If you acknowledge Hashem Elokeinu melech olam. We had the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara says in Brachos that a person says a bracha below Shem Malchus, he does not say the Shem Hashem, and acknowledging Him as melech ain't a bracha. It's not a bracha. So it's not enough to say bracha to Hashem. You have to say Elokeinu melech olam. If you leave those words out, it's not a valid bracha. Because again, atem adveikim Hashem Elokeinu chayim kulchem hayom. When are you chayim? When it's dveikim. And what's the dveikim? The tag, the crown is on the kuf to lud. That how does one maintain that cognizance? It's through mei brachos, 100 brachos every day, because the miracle value of kuf is 100 through the 100 brachos every day. So we mentioned then, I showed you the Rambam. The Rambam writes that although we have multiple types of brachos, and they're all rabbinical, when you benefit from food or drink, when you do a mitzvah, when you say praises to Hashem, what is the value of saying a bracha? So he says, these are the words of Rambam, Kiri lizkor boro tamid, to remember your Creator continuously. That itself, that was the objective of legislating the brachos and all these various applications. Kiri lizkor boro tamid, to remember your Creator continuously. And that's the dveikim. How does a person remain attached continuously? Mei brachos b'chol yom. It's interesting, we find that we were in the desert, and it's clear, we speak in this parsha, that without the man, humanly it was impossible to survive. It's only because Hashem provided man on a daily basis, that nourished us, that sustained us, and that's how we survived the 40 years in the desert. So, the Midrash asks, every day, every morning, they had to go out and collect the man. Seemingly, you have a son, and he needs an allowance. Do you tell him to come every single day to pick up the allowance? You give him a week's allowance, give him a month allowance, give him 6 months allowance. And then afterwards, once it's depleted, he comes back for more. Or you replenish the account. Hashem says, no, every day you go out and you gather the money. Hashem could have given us a week's supply of money, a month's supply of money. Why every single day, day in and day out, we had to come, knock on Hashem's door and say, daily delivery. And not only that, you couldn't keep the mun more than a day. If you would keep it more than a day, it would become putrid. Its shelf life was exactly 1 day. It didn't keep from day to day. So as much as you wanted to convince yourself you don't have to the next day to regather it, it's not going to work. And you understand your survival is dependent on that daily dosage of mun. But why? Why is Hashem, Hashem wants to be focused on our spirituality. Study Torah day and continuously. We have to go be busy. Go out and pick up the milk every morning. Go out and gather the mun for yourself, for your family. So the Midrash says, Hashem says, if I give you a week's supply, a month's supply, so when do you know me? You pick up to him, Dad, I just got to build the credit cards due. Could you please send a check? But until that due bill comes, the father doesn't hear from the son. That is the nature of a person. When a person understands he's in need, then you recognize and you acknowledge. And it's in the forefront of your mind. The moment you have that sense that at this moment I don't need you, out of sight, out of mind. And Hashem says, I don't want that. You have every day, the in and then out, you have to think about me. And that's why every day they have to go collect that daily dosage of whatever was needed for the person in the first family, for that reason. The same idea. It's to maintain the cognizance, which is crucial and essential to the function to perform the mitzvahs, which we're obligated to keep. That's the concept. So the Torah is juxtaposing to what the Torah tells us. You have to be extra careful not to forget Hashem. Levilti shmo mitzvosov, not to keep his mitzvos, his mishpatim, and his chukim. Asher nochu mitzavcha hayom. It's interesting in Europe. Especially in Russia and Poland and Lithuania, the financial situation of the Jew was not great. It wasn't like Western Europe, Germany, Hungary. There they had bounty. Even the Jews had less, because the ones who had more, they shared it with the ones who had a little less. But in Poland and Russia, very few people had. They were happy to have just food on the table. So, something, they were kept pretty humble. It's interesting. The Reform movement was in Germany and in Hungary. What's the Reform movement? No. Reformation, Lahavdil, Elif Havdolis. Reformation of Judaism. We got to reform it. They had Reformation, they had a Reform movement. That's what it's called, a reform. In Germany, what was Germany? It was like the height of civilization over there. They had material, they had all the updated lifestyles, everything. So what happens when you're into that? Ram Levavcha. Once it's Ram Levavcha, once you have that confidence and we have the independence, the intellectualism, everything else, God takes the back burner. And then you become the one who determines who God is and who God is not. You write your own narrative, your own script. You become a script writer. You understand? The man is a banker, all of a sudden he's a script writer. He's a doctor, he's a musician, he's a playwright, he's a script writer. He's writing a new religion. And it's the closest thing to Christianity. And ultimately, as it's pointed out, in 30 years in Germany, from 1820, or maybe from 1820 to 1860 or 70, 50% of Germans converted to Christianity. German Jews. 50%. Could you imagine? That's how overwhelming the draw towards Christianity was. Because they wanted to reform. They wanted to be like them. But what existed in Germany? It was Ram Levavcha. As it says, Hisham Elcha. Once you succeed financially and are acknowledged for other things other than your Judaism, it's v'shachachtas Hashem Elokecha. You begin forgetting God. And that becomes the problem.
Well, Rabbi, what was the period of time that Rabbi just said?
They converted? From the early part of the 1800s till about 1850, 1860.